So in 5 minutes, I'm going to try and cover the basics of this PowerPoint, thinking theatrically, doing differently. And really, this is just a further presentation on the modules of adaptation and an extension of the argument of making in a dimensional discipline. And so therefore thinking theatrically is also the projection of the dimension as much as doing differently means thinking in a different way. So mapping and making is something that is situated as an underpinning to the notion around theatre making, because it's about a document that inscribes the dimension. So if you think about a map, the map holds the dimensional activity, inscribes it, it holds it, it reads it, it audits it in the same way that theatre does. And if we think about some of the notions around the map in terms of contact, immediacy, translation, and particularly in regards to the current space that we're in, this idea and difficulty of the flat map versus the dimensional map or the global map. So theatre making is working within the circle because it is dimensional and it is about the collective. But it is also an integrated discipline because it takes on many dimensions or several dimensions. And so therefore the dimensionality is interconnected, and then it becomes difficult and complex. So why adaptation and why theory? So this is just really a note around the kind of development of my own theory around adaptation. And I think what is important here to kind of identify is the idea of allowance, that the primary source of material makes or forms a contract of allowance as a kind of an allowing the remaking of the original work. So there's an entry point to the text that says you can see this in an alternative discipline and in an alternate dimension. So once the allowance or the contract occurs and the adaptation happens, there will be this proliferation. The original work will break up and then it'll be reheld, reassured in terms of that kind of conversation between what remains, what of the original remains. And this might occur through the modes of translation, interpretation, or transposition as a way of honoring the original. So you could think of these terms as also methods along the primary source, the story. The entry point can always be a subjective thing. How do you feel about the primary source? And then these are terms that could just, I've spoken about the implement, but these terms then become ways of implementing the adaptation, ways to consider how one works, whether one works in a fragmented way, whether one works in an immersive way, to enter into the text. And then a third way would be an implanted way, a kind of grafting way onto the original primary source. So some of the case studies we'll be looking at in just as a kind of slide, but there's a note there on crepuscle, which we've used to have in the course, and it's something to possibly talk back to in the larger class. So some of the, these I'll talk back to in the larger class, the breakdown of stories in terms of themes and genre. This, of course, talks back to the dimension and the shape that one is making. And then a very interesting conversation by Linda Hutchian on adaptation, which is on YouTube. Some more theory and references, which I'll talk back to in the larger class. And then again, these are just entry points or ways to work theatrically in regards to when you're on or you're activating the work. Again, some tools or implements to the notion of adaptation and devising. And then, of course, the way to conclude the class as an extension is the platform itself. And I suppose what will happen tomorrow is an integration of some of these ideas through also the readings by Eleanor Fuchs and theatre making and animal spirits.